This rich man has a deep sense of entitlement and deservedness. Everyone should kowtow to him. The reality is, the way things were, Jesus is saying, need to be flipped on their head. Now, I also want to be clear that even as we talk about liberation and liberating those of us who have much, we have to be careful with this parable from the perspective of those who are promised the kingdom. For how many generations have people who have been living in slavery or poverty or have felt the effects of warfare or discrimination been told, don't worry, just wait for the sweet by and by. You'll get your just rewards then. This becomes problematic also because it lets those of us here off the hook. To say that liberation, that new life comes in the afterlife. I believe that that's taking the story too far. And I believe that what Jesus is doing is rooting the sense of liberation in the here and now. He's certainly using a parable that reflects on afterlife, using Greek and Hebrew versions melded together of the bosom of Abraham and Hades. But he is calling people to attention now, saying, look around. Who do you see that is in need? Now, the reality is many of us can walk out our doors and walk or drive to work or take the bus and ignore those around us. We can put on our own blinders to those who might be in need. It may be an emotional need. It may be a physical need. It may be financial. But it can be very easy for us to be like the rich man and have on our blinders and go walking through life. And at that point, we are called to attention. To be the ones for whom this one who was raised from the dead has come. To unsettle and startle us and say that just as we have Moses and the prophets, there is one who is shaking up our world even more, who is not going to let us go so easily, who's going to call us to account. And then there are the words of liberation for those who are in need. Those who long to know there's a place for them. That they aren't invisible. That people can see them. Care for them. Where do you plug into this story today? As an American, someone living in the top probably 10 to 15% of the world's population in terms of wealth? Are you someone who plugs in, who taps into the story as the rich man? Or are you coming today, perhaps with your own struggles, your own longings, wanting to be seen and known where you are at, looking for liberation as Lazarus, this one who longs to know new life? That is something that only you can answer. And maybe, if you're like me and others, there is a hint of both. That need to be challenged and to be liberated from what we have but also that sense to be liberated to God, to others, to be seen really, deeply, wonderfully. I think about those who have experienced some sort of liberation. As we talked about it this last week, a story that came to my mind was of my great-great-uncle, Thorvald. He made the trek from Norway to the United States. He created his own little business, eventually with my great-grandfather as a partner. They had their general store. But he was concerned about those he had left behind. So, he helped with a group of folks start a fund to send money back to the widows and the orphans in Norway. And also in the general store, they tell stories about folks who couldn't pay their bills, and so they would try to help them out. He had a deep care for those who were around him. He believed in being a voice of hope for those in need. Yet in his older age, he was also keenly aware that he received the assistance of others, that he needed the help that others could provide as he grew older, as his body began to give out. As I shared the story with some friends, we talked about others who have experienced that same sort of thing. Today we have immigrants from Mexico and Central America. We have immigrants from Africa. We were thinking about some of the stories of liberation and new life that they have experienced. Escaping political dictatorships, war, escaping famine, escaping economic forces that were driving things down. But yet, even as they came to a new place of promise, of freedom and liberation, they haven't forgotten. They continue to send support back to family members, to friends, to cousins and cousins of cousins, to make sure that people are cared for. What does that mean for us to be the caregivers? Liberation theology, it's not a dirty word. It is powerful and wonderful for those who need liberation from and those who need liberation to. And as we journey this day and all days, may we tell that story of new life and promise, walking in the ways of the one who has overcome death, who is the great liberator. Thanks be to God.